Good evening. Welcome to the City of Dublin Board of Zoning Appeals. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive and also access the meeting via live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including public comment on the case. The meeting procedure for the cases this evening will begin with staff presentation, followed by an opportunity for each applicant to make a presentation. The board will then have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions, first of the staff and then of the applicant, prior to hearing public comments. Finally, the board will deliberate on the case. Lori, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Deschler?
Here.
Mr. Nye?
Here.
Mr. Clower?
Here.
Mr. Murphy?
Here.
We'll move next to the acceptance of documents and approval of the meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to accept the documents in the record and approve the meeting minutes from August 25, 2022?
If you so moved.
I second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Clower?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
We'll be moving into the swearing of witnesses and staff. Anyone attending to address the board this evening, please stand, raise your right hand, and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board? Thank you. Okay, we'll start with our first case this evening. That's the Toman residence at 5692 Rich Grove Lane. It's case number 22-112V with regard to a non-use area variance. For clarity, this is an application for a variance to allow a building-mounted residential solar panel as an accessory structure to be located on a street-facing facade on a 0.19 acre site zoned planned low-density residential district, Brighton Park. The site is located 260 feet northeast of the intersection of Rich Grove Lane with Kentfield Drive. Our city's presentation this evening will be from Tammy Noble. Tammy?
Thank you. The first case before the Board of Zoning Appeals, again, is a case that is specific to solar panels. The request is to allow for solar panels to the forefront of the building. And the site location is 5692 Rich Grove Lane. The site that you see before you is approximately a fifth of an acre in size. It's similarly sized to its adjacent properties, primarily rectangular in shape, although it does have a circular property line to the south based on its location to a cul-de-sac. The site is developed with a single family residential structure with a patio area to the rear. The site is zoned for a planned district and is zoned for residential uses. And the applicant is proposing solar panels to the forefront of the property. For edification to the board, this is the first time that the board has heard an application of this sort, so we wanted to give some background to the application. Currently, residential solar panels are not currently listed as a specific use in the entire zoning code for the City of Dublin. It is, however, permitted in specific districts that we have throughout the district, or throughout the city, including the West Innovation District, the Bridge Street District, and an area called the Dublin Corporate Area Plan. And those are newer area plans to the city. To allow for solar panels in the interim of the city being able to adopt language that's specific to solar panels, we have identified solar panels as accessory uses. which is under the current section that you see in the second bullet point. This allows us to allow residential property owners to construct solar panels to the side and the rear of properties. Accessory structures do prohibit construction to the forefront of the properties, and this is necessitating the applicant's request for solar panels before the Board of Zoning Appeals. In this particular request, again, I'm identifying the section that we're dealing with for residential, accessory structures. For this particular graphic, we're showing where the applicant has identified where the solar panels will be identified and placed on the structure. The details of each of these applications, there's 3 in totality. Each of the detail is slightly different, so I'll provide the information for this particular application. The company that we're addressing is Ohio Power. They have given us 2 scenarios that the applicant can pursue, one of which allows 12 panels that will produce a certain wattage of energy produced from the solar panels. The second scenario actually incorporates 19 panels, and the actual wattage is slightly less than the first scenario. We've provided the graphic showing the potential locations for where those solar panels will be located. The nuances will be identified. If this were to be successful, it would be identified within the building permit, but these are the general locations that we would permit. This is an existing site photo of the residential structure. For the board and primarily the applicants and the public, the review criteria that we have for variances are very specific. There's actually 2 sections of code that we apply to each variance request. The first are the 3 that you see on the screen before you, and the 3 that are required for approval of an application. The first is that the application or the site itself produces some special conditions that don't exist in other properties within the city and adjacent communities. In this particular application, we believe the site is similar in size to the adjacent properties to the applicant's house, specifically to the immediate surrounding areas to the east and west, and most specifically to the development in and of itself. We therefore find that there's no special conditions associated with this particular proposal. The second is asking whether the special conditions, if they do exist, were they produced by the applicant, whether it be by action or inaction of the applicant. We've assessed that this request is being prompted by the applicants for reasons of renewable energy in their homes, but necessitated nonetheless by the applicants. The third criteria is that would their request, if approved, impair the intent of the code? Our assessment is that, again, accessory structures are prohibited to the forefront of the properties. This is to prevent any type of disruption to the immediate community and provide some level of aesthetics to a community. We do find that this would directly impact that requirement, and we are pursuing code language that would address this modification, but at this point, with the language in and of itself for accessory structures, we do believe it would impair the intent of that code. The second set of criteria, again, for everyone's awareness, this is less stringent than the first set of criteria. It actually allows for 2 of the 4 criteria to be met in order to be successful. The first criteria suggests that if the variance application were to be approved, would that be allowing the applicant a special privilege? Our assessment of this particular criteria is that the zoning code in and of itself allows for properties to have solar panels in certain locational requirements, and therefore allowing them in this particular instance would allow for a special privilege. The second is the application recurrent in nature? And this is an actual, this is interesting in this particular instance because this is recurrent in nature. We've had a flux of applications that have proposed solar panels in general within the city of Dublin. We therefore are, we as in the city of Dublin, are proposing a zoning code update to address this regulation. So we would find that this is recurrent in nature, which is unusual for the Board of Zoning Appeals. The third is, does the request impact the delivery of governmental services? We find that that is not impacted by the proposal of solar panels. And lastly, but not least, the criteria asked, are there other acceptable methods for the applicant to pursue whatever land use development that they propose with meeting the current zoning regulations? In this particular instance, we analyzed the information that was provided to us by, in this instance, a solar company. And their analysis is there's other methods of locating solar panels in their specific criteria to the application. They did state that the solar panels, if located otherwise, again in quotes, would be underperforming, overexpensive, but they did suggest that there's another alternative, and that's important because the purpose of the application is that granting this request or other request for that matter would prohibit the property owner from a use. So we did find that that could be acceptable, although it seems as if it's underperforming and at a different cost. Using that criteria, we've analyzed the request, and we are suggesting the Board of Zoning Appeals recommend disapproval for the non-use variance. This is specifically to building mounted residential solar panels opposed to ground mounted, which we will talk about in other instances, and specifically to the forefront of a building. And I'm here to answer any questions. I do believe the applicants are here as well as their solar company that's representing them.
Thanks, Tammy. Do we have any questions for staff at this time?
I don't have any at this time.
I know the city is talking about changing these requirements. Has there been any sort of drafted regulation or anything like that that would be publicly available?
We have, yes. In April of this year, we did present, so we presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission a total of 3 times. The first was in October of 2021, which was just an introductory to the conversation. And that was just a more conversational type of presentation. In April, we did actually present language to the Planning and Zoning Commission, of which they wanted more information about the functionality of solar, the technologies that are advancing for solar energy. So they instructed staff to provide more information to them. We then presented actually a week ago, and they gave us some guidance for a code update, and that's essentially what we're preparing in the next month or so.
Will solar panels still fall under the accessory structures category for roof mounted?
Our draft language would not follow accessory structures, and it would be basically a standalone code modification.
And then what do the drafted ones say about with respect to the street facing versus not street facing solar panels?
So based on the information that we received last week, we don't have a draft currently in place. We have had conversations with the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is the first body that would review this, as well as City Council. We have limited support for solar panels to the forefront of buildings, but we are giving some options for those situations. And we probably won't have a clear indication until we actually propose that language. But we've been very clear of what our guidance has been, and we'll move forward accordingly.
How much of it depends on the particulars of the house? Like if a house has a roof pitch of a certain angle, so it makes it impractical to catch sun on the backside, how much of that factors into the language of the as of yet to be drafted regulation?
Yeah, no, that honestly, the functionality has been a limited part of our conversations. It's more about material choices, opacity, and general aesthetics. There's been some conversations if it supplements for other building materials, such as, let's just say it's a window and it acts as if it's a solar energy recipient, that would be acceptable. But these conversations are fairly preliminary, so I hesitate to get too much into the details. We literally have not presented a full draft until probably the end of October, we're hoping.
Thank you, Tammy.
Any other questions for staff? Tammy, I have one. I think I want to address it with you rather than the applicant. The applicant within their statement had put a photo of a home, and they provided the address there with front-facing solar panels. Are you aware of that?
We are, yeah.
Okay, so is that in Dublin? I'm not necessarily certain where that is, so.
I believe I understand the address, but I would defer to the applicant to be specific.
Okay.
I will tell you just for information for the general conversation, we've had specific conversations with our building department about, so solar panels will come in as an application before our building department because they one, are a structural device, and two, they have an electronic component to them. And so we've made sure that we're cohesive in how we're reviewing these permits. And as far as any type of permits that have been issued since we've identified solar panels as accessory structures, the building department has equally followed those policies. The one thing that we can't address is whether or not permits have been acquired, which is always a difficult part. And secondarily, whether they precede our policy of identifying them as accessory structures. So as of a couple years ago, we again cohesively decided that we would identify them as accessory uses and proceed accordingly. And so the ultimate answer to your question is I would defer to the applicant for a specific location.
Okay.
Actually thought of one. Tammy, I have a general question. It'll be for each application tonight, but first of all, the applicant's been informed that because we don't have a full board, that they would require 3 votes, and if 2 votes were a no, that the application would be denied because of the lack of a majority.
Absolutely.
Okay, and secondarily, has it been discussed with them? I believe from reading this it has, but I didn't want to imply anything, that if there was a change made by these proposals that you're discussing in a month, that let's say something could be approved that wouldn't be approved otherwise, are they aware that they had an option of tabling this and waiting until that was finalized?
I think that's a fair point of clarification. So just again, to add to the conversation, this is a code modification that the city is currently pursuing. It would start at let's just say, if all is anticipated as such, would proceed to the Planning and Zoning Commission in October. It would probably take several visits to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then proceed to City Council. Again, I hesitate to give too much merit of what that would actually say because that is indicative of other boards and commissions' thoughts and considerations, but we are pursuing it, and it is absolutely an option to await that process.
So if we deny them and then normally the process is if we deny an application, then they have to wait a year before applying again for any sort of variance. In this case, if they don't get the requisite 3 votes and they're denied, do they have to wait a full year, or can they wait until the regulations have been amended and then apply under the new regulations?
So first, it would depend on what those regulations actually allow, but let's just say they allow for solar panels specifically to the forefront of a building, and any other development standards that we would require that they meet, as soon as those regulations are in place, they can apply.
That's also assuming they'd be completed within a year.
Yeah, right, which very well could take longer than that. So let's say that they decide to pursue this, they don't get the requisite votes, they're locked out for a year, and the regulations do not change. There's no recourse for them at that point, right? They just need to wait until that year has passed and hope that they could maybe apply with a different standard or something like that.
That's true for the most part. The only caveat that I would give to that is they could reapply if their request is different. So I'm going to give a very generic example. Let's just say I'm asking for 20 panels to be on the forefront of my building, and I change my proposal to be 16. And from a staff's perspective, that's a variation of an application, and we would accept that accordingly.
Patrick, anything? Good? Right on?
I have no questions at this time now.
Okay. Can we have the property owner, is it Toman? I got it right the first time. Okay, good. Can you come up to the mic here, please?
And if you have a representative from the solar company that you want to bring with you as well, you can bring them in.
Sure.
As long as you swore in. They don't have.
If they're. You're on. Can you make sure the mic turns, there we go. You got it.
Yep. Is that working? Okay.
On. So if you see the light on top of it, you'll know.
Short, name and address. So Christopher Toman, 5692 Rich Grove Lane. And this is Olga Toman.
Olga Toman, 5692 Ridge Grove Lane, Dublin, Ohio.
You can go ahead and present your case.
Sure. I think that Tammy touched on a lot of the items, but I think the main thing, at least in our case, that this is about is efficiency. As she noted, the solar company provided, initially he only provided on the front of the house because it's the obvious place to do it. We live on a east-west street. Front of the house faces south. Given where Dublin's located, that's the ideal place to put solar panels. And ultimately, again, as I was about to say, it's about efficiency. If you put the solar panels on the north-facing side of the house, I'm sure anyone who lives in Dublin knows what happens to the north side of your house. Over 18 months, you start to get algae buildup on it just because it doesn't get sunlight. So given, again, as Tammy noted in our case, it's significantly more panels to produce less electricity. And what is on the screen right now, the 19 panels for 5,828 kilowatt hours it's not on the screen, but I believe that's about it's a little bit less than 90% of the house's energy needs based off our current electric bills. As you can see, the hooligans over there messing about are 8 and 4. So as they get bigger, that becomes covers even less of the house's electric needs, because as they grow, as will our electric needs. So putting the panels on the front just makes it significantly more efficient, able to cover the full energy for the property. And then, you know, the one other thing I'd like to add is, given the current zoning code, pretty much anyone in our situation of east-west street, front of the house facing south, the street facing portion facing south, under the current code, it doesn't make sense for anyone to have solar panels on their property because they won't produce enough energy to power their house, which is the point. I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your time being here tonight. I'm sure you have far more pleasant things to do. Thank you very much for being here for us. A couple of things that I wanted to touch on is, first of all, we are not front street facing. We're not facing some main street where there's a lot of traffic. All people that get to see our house are our neighbors. We have been stopped by in the recent week by our neighbors asking, you know, how this hearing is going to take place, what's going on. And we only heard the words of encouragement from our neighbors. So those are the ones to get to see our house with those panels. And those are the people that we're worrying about, you know, that we will offend them with the looks of our house having solar panels on them. If we look at this picture on the screen, we will see our roof looking very light gray. In fact, the roof is of a darker shade of gray, and the panels will be black. So it's not like we, you know, throwing something lime green, polka dot red on the roof. And I'm sure we would have heard from our neighbors about this type action. You know, something I wanted to touch on. Another thing I wanted to mention is this is not a historic building. This is just a residential house built in 1994. And we're just people who are seeking maybe raising some awareness in addition to getting to use renewable resources. That's maybe something else I wanted to mention. In addition to that, in Tammy's presentation in the first slide, I have seen that she referenced Ohio zoning code. It's 153-076 B6A, I believe. Yeah, there you go. So it's the fifth line from the top. I pulled it up on the screen, and if you don't mind, I will read from it. And please correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not something that I've found correctly. So all accessory uses and structures, including swimming pools and associated decking, shall be constructed within the permitted buildable area of a lot behind all applicable setback lines and to the rear or side of the principal structure. I understand that the solar panels are considered an accessory. We're not attempting to put a swimming pool or deck or something of that sort in front of the house. We have quite a bit of front yard. We probably could have tried to do that. I'm sure this would not be allowed, but that's not what we're trying to do here, essentially. And then I, browsed some online sources, and here is what I found. And correct me, maybe I did not look in the right location, but so this is from case. This is on the Dublin, Ohio, USA.gov. It's case 21-151 administrative request code amendment. And there has been Planning and Zoning Commission on April 21st, 2022. And if you don't mind, I will read from that. Is it okay? Thank you. All right. So there are different abbreviations here, and you will likely be more, better acquainted with it than I am. But what I'm seeing there under the MUR-4 permits renewable energy equipment as an accessory use in all districts with use specific standards. Item 3, rooftop and building mounted equipment shall adhere to the following requirements. A, rooftop equipment for the collection of solar energy shall not extend beyond the maximum permitted height of the principal structure, the house. B, building mounted renewable energy equipment shall be completely integrated into the architectural character of the principal structure and shall not be located on an elevation facing a residential use. I believe we're within the limits here. I don't think that we're trying to do something outrageous by locating the platforms, locating the solar panels where they are efficient. Unfortunately, and we would love to put them on the back of the roof, but unfortunately, the way the house is situated and the way the roof is sloped, we are not going to be able to do that. That's why we're trying to do what we can and locate them where we can. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks.
Do we have any questions for the applicant?
The first question, which Jason asked earlier, was about the image that you provided in the applicant statement. Could you give us details? Where is that?
Yeah, let me pull up the address. Apologize if it's not exactly within the jurisdiction, your jurisdiction, we'll say. But I believe I provided the address in, if I could pull it up on the screen for you, I would on Google Maps. You can actually see it on there.
Timmy, can you pull the picture up?
Yeah, it's 6152 Jacana Drive, which is over off Avery Road. So in where City Hall is situated, it would be to the northwest.
How do you spell the?
Jacana. I probably could have added more to it, but from when I provided the application a few months ago, I looked up and I believe it's in, I think I put into the application which ward it's in. I can't recall off the top of my head. I apologize.
Yeah, you put it in your statement with the address, the photo.
So in the meantime, I have some questions. The 12 panels versus 19 panels. The 12 panels would be entirely located on the front side of the house, and 19 panels in their proposal would be entirely located on the back. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. Do you happen to know the pitch of the roof of your house, the slope that it's at?
I believe it's about 32 degrees.
32 degrees? Thank you. Okay. And then the Planning and Zoning Commission thing that you read us, what was the context of that? Where was that from? Was that a public meeting or?
With the first or the second?
The one that defined the rooftop shall not extend beyond the height integrated into the existing architecture.
Do you mind if I bring it to you?
Robin, I think those were the meetings that Tammy was.
Okay.
I think
Yeah, so the next one is in October.
Okay, that was those. Okay, thank you.
essentially that's the proposed code.
This is existing regulations as far as on April 21st, 2022.
Yeah, it's in Dublin. It's across the street from the Avery like soccer fields.
Yeah, there's those soccer fields across the street, basically.
Tammy, can we get some context then on this from, if this isn't, what is it, Hawks Nest? Is that the address? Is that in, it's Hawks Nest, right? Isn't that across from?
Yeah, it's Hawks Nest.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me some background on this. If we have, I assume you have the information on this address.
I mean, again, we have two scenarios that this could have taken place. Either they were constructed without permits or they're constructed before we identified them as accessory structures.
So it's the city's position that the fact that there's this home that has this on the front facing, it's not relevant for consideration this evening. Is that fair?
It doesn't meet what the regulations that we're speaking of, yes.
It doesn't. Can you restate what you just said, please?
It doesn't meet the code restrictions that we're applying to this application. Again, there's two scenarios that could be the scenario. I just can't say which of the two.
When did the city start enforcing the accessory structures rule?
It was approximately 3 years ago. And again, this was right when, and the building department would have started these regulations. So I'm a bit removed from these conversations, but it was essentially when we started to see an influx of regulations. Before that, we simply weren't, again, according to my conversations with the building department, we weren't getting applications. When property owners started to investigate, they started calling the city, and then we investigated the right or the appropriate route to then process the applications.
Okay, I just want to be clear on this. So regardless of the reason, whether it was from a time perspective or the other, the fact that this address in Dublin has front-facing solar panels is simply not relevant for the board's consideration this evening.
That's true.
Okay.
The only thing I would add, the only thing that's relevant about it is that this board has never granted a variance, did not grant a variance for it.
Okay, yeah, I have someone from the audience provided. There's more properties in Dublin that I'm sure will come up in one of the later cases maybe, that also have solar panels on a street-facing roof. So I guess if you're saying nothing's been approved by the board, perhaps they predate. I don't know.
Yeah. And then an additional context, we said that this house isn't that important, but there was a Google Street View image taken from August 2019 that did not have the solar panels. So that is right in line with the 3 years that you were talking about. And it's hard to pinpoint it down more than that.
Tammy, would you be able to pull up the first 3 criteria for me, please?
While she's doing that, Robin, did you have some additional questions for the applicant?
Not at this time.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
There's no question pending yet. There will be in 1 second. We're pulling up some of the
Good deal.
required standards.
Okay, thank you.
Ask.
Yeah, I was waiting.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Okay.
yep.
So how we look at these, we have to find, you can see the 3 that are on the screen behind you. We have to find all 3 of these. So your presentation will require you to present to us how all 3 of these are met. I haven't heard anything from you yet on those, so I want to ask you specifically, what is special about your property that doesn't exist somewhere else?
You know, I stated, I think what's special about it is the fact that it's not a one-off case. Any house on an east-west street that's on the north side of the street is going to run into the same issue. And so, as you all know, there's multiple applicants tonight that all are probably similar in stature. So I think it's special in the sense that you have, if we simply lived on the other side of the street, we wouldn't be here, right?
And allow me to add to this. I think what makes it special is the direction of the pitch. So if the house had the roof pitched in such manner that we would be, one side would be east facing and the other one would be west facing. In this case, it doesn't matter where we put them, we would have sun at, half a day here, half a day there. We would not be here right now then, because this would not be the case for that. Whether it's front facing or back facing, it would be side facing. So that's what makes our house special.
So, for example, things that we found before that are special are somebody's backed up to a nature preserve and no other house has that. So your house facing a certain direction and saying that numerous other houses in the city do that is the exact opposite of a special condition. It would actually prove that it's not a special condition. So is there anything other than your roof pitch that you think is different about your house than any other house?
I think this is applicable to this case because the solar panels are roof-mounted panels. The roof has a pitch. The pitch is in a certain manner that prevents us from using it efficiently anywhere except for front side. And there's not a single thing we can change about it. It's not something we can change. This is how house is oriented and how it has been built.
I can move on to debate.
Patrick, anything for the applicant? I just want to be clear for the record. With these conditions here, we've addressed the first one. You have to say, let's assume for the purposes of this conversation that we agree with you with regard to the roof pitch as being a special condition. You'd still have to satisfy 2 and 3. Are you able to comment on those?
So you would like me to go through the 2 and 3?
Oh, you don't have to, but if you'd like us.
You're suggesting, would you like to?
I am suggesting that. Okay.
Thank you. So second, applicant action, inaction. The variance request is necessitated by the applicant and is necessitated on the basis on switching to renewable energy on the home. I'm not
So-
sure what the criteria is.
Yeah, if you would like the actual criteria, because that's the staff's recommendation,
Uh-huh.
the specific language, and I think Tammy can pull this up, is quote unquote, that the variance is not necessitated because of any action or inaction of the applicant. So for context, in the past, we have, for instance, if somebody wants to build a patio in their backyard, then there's a possibility that the action is not them wanting to build the patio, because we found that just the act, if we said like the action is building the patio, then nobody could ever build a patio in their backyard, because that would be the action. The action is like the size of the patio or the location of the patio. That's the action that we care about. Does it overlap with the boundaries of the house? So is there a particular action or inaction that is causing that necessitates this variance?
I don't think I follow. I apologize. I think it's convoluted enough that it's easy to get lost in this.
That's fair. This one is the one that's been the sticking point for me being on this council for 2 years. Essentially, if I may, the action is not, and this is probably something we're going to debate, the action is not the fact that you want to build solar panels on the house. It's that the solar panels where you are placing them right now is what's causing the action. So if you built them on the other side of the house, or if you built them in your backyard or something like that, that is the action that we would care about.
But what is the action? What defines the action?
You know, you can have you want to hop in, Jesse? Thank you.
I think the easiest way to clarify it is that you are requesting this variance and you need this variance because you want to put solar panels on the front of the house. You don't need a variance to put it on the back of the house. And so what we're saying is the action that has necessitated this variance is your decision. Now I understand it's economic and efficiency. It's your decision to put it on the front of the house, but you don't have to do that to have solar panels. It might be a little more costly, it might be a little less efficient, but you don't need a variance to put it on the rear of the home.
Yeah, I'll like a little bit more, I'll respectfully disagree with that. In this situation, there's really no purpose. It defeats the purpose of having solar panels on your house if you cannot supply for your home's energy needs. And so in the orientation, the roof pitch, and all the things that we've discussed up to this point, there's one ideal good place to put them on the house. And if you can't put them there, you don't put them on.
Okay, and then if you want to address the third point for us, please.
Can you bring up the,
Well, this is the actual wording of the requirement, and then the other one that she was showing you was the staff's recommendation, why they would recommend against it.
So
It's
it's
the
number
third
3.
point, yeah. Number 3, granting the variance.
3?
Yeah.
It's on the screen right now.
I'll read it out loud. Granting the variance will not cause a substantial adverse effect to property or improvements in the vicinity, or will not materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied. or of this chapter?
So essentially what we would want to know is how does you putting solar panels on the south side of your house not cause a substantial adverse effect for this one?
Yeah, I'd like, how does it cause an adverse effect would be my question. I don't think it causes an adverse effect in
The
any
staff already advised how that didn't meet criteria. Tammy, if you want to chime in and repeat yourself, please feel free to do so.
So our analysis is essentially that the whole intent of the code section is to allow certain locations for accessory uses, and this is the one location that it prohibits.
So in essence, the intent from the city of the code is to not have them on the front of the house. So you would have to state why this would not be contrary to the intent of not having them on the front of the house.
Who is writing the code? Who are the people writing this code?
Codes are adopted by city council. They're drafted, I mean, they're drafted commonly, but they're ultimately adopted by city council.
Are there people in this room right now who are partial in this, who are writing this zoning code?
I actually have a follow-up question. Can you provide me an example where this criteria has been met? Because it sounds like it's, the way it was just phrased, it's meant not to be met. So is there an example where this, if you could, a similar residential situation where this criteria has been met? Because the way it was phrased, it kind of made it sound like, prove to us why the code doesn't apply to you. The whole point of the code is to keep you from doing something.
Mhm.
How can you ever meet this criteria? So I'd like an example.
Yeah, we have approved variances that commonly before this board. Your comments are correct. They are meant to be difficult. It's meant to be in instances where you can't meet the code to accommodate the use that you are seeking. I will say there's not a similar instance for solar panels, so I can't give you that.
I'm not asking specifically for solar panels. Can I get a example of just a residential example? Doesn't have to be solar panels, I'm just curious as to what would actually meet this criteria. And maybe I then can frame my argument.
I'll do some research while we're talking on the next point.
That's the questions to staff. So we'll let Tammy provide a response when you're ready. Do you need a minute? Okay. While Tammy's looking that up, Robin, Patrick, Joe, do you have any other questions?
No, I just want to address one of the questions asked. So I know that you had inquired who drafts the code. We are not the body that drafts the code.
Okay.
We're not asked about drafting the code. We don't prepare the drafts. We're not part of planning and zoning. I know that gets confusing to applicants a lot of times. Our job is to take requests that are made for specific appeals that are asked for, and we are tasked with applying these criteria. We didn't develop the criteria. They were given to us. So the questions that we're asking you are not based on what we think they should be, what we want them to be. We're told these are what we have to apply, and what we have to meet and what we're required to do was set forth long before any of us were here. So you know where our questions are coming from. We're required to find these things if we are to grant a variance, if that makes sense and answers the question you asked.
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem.
So if I might just answer the question that was posed, and this is the most recent and just a very quick overview of what we've done. And I'm going to get you a date. In June of this year, we provided a variance request to a property, Johansson's the property owner. The request was to allow for a structure in front of a primary structure based on the topography, the shape of the lot, and honestly, the size of the lot, and that was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
So can you specifically, how did it meet the third criteria?
That they would not have been able to build a building because of the topography of the site. They would not have been able to build what they wanted to build because of the conditions of the site.
And was that for an accessory?
It was, yes.
What was the accessory?
I'm sorry?
What was the accessory?
A shed?
It was like a
Hmm.
shed.
Mr. Tillman, do you have any additional questions for staff? Or Mrs. Tillman?
I do, but I don't believe anything that I will say or ask will change anything here. Unfortunately, all we're trying to do is to use renewable energy sources. And by installing it where we are, we're raising awareness.
Yeah, I mean,
All
what,
renewable energy sources being available,
I think for
being
this,
prevented and stopped from doing that. Residents of Dublin paying taxes, following the law,
so I
doing
think,
everything that is expected of us. But one simple thing, it looks like it's a huge,
real quick, hold your thought. Hey, in the back, this is already being recorded. I don't know, we allowed supplemental recordings during it? How does that work? I really don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to make
We
sure.
typically allow it.
You do it? Just making sure.
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure we're following protocol. I mean, we're already being recorded, so I'm not certain why somebody else, maybe different angle. Maybe. You can go ahead though. I'm sorry.
I was done.
Okay, so I think that the difficult situation here is the code section is currently under consideration to be amended to allow certain instances where perhaps front-facing solar panels could be permitted within the city. Okay, so you're falling into this gap period where you want it now. There's going to be reluctancy on this board, and I'll speak personally about it, when there's no identified code and we have to follow the code that we've been instructed to follow, where we're not going to set an improper precedent. It's just not going to happen. So you can, we haven't had a discussion yet on this. It's just that in this situation, at least you have an option. If you want it now, you have an option to get solar panels on the back of your house. It's something. I know it's not exactly what you wanted, but it's not nothing either. So if we don't have any other questions for the applicants, we can have a quick discussion of the board and figure out what we're going to do.
Well, and Jason, I think that's a good point, is that a lot of the people that are before us have no other option. So we oftentimes, people look historically at what we debate in this portion of our debate is there a modification? So we've spent a lot of time, especially in our last few meetings, is there a modification that can be made to allow us to do our job, but still permit this to happen? And you're right, there is that circumstance here. So, given the code that we are required to uphold and given the criteria that we're required to follow, I'm not sure what options that we have at this point. And I want to make sure the applicant is aware that they have the option of not having a vote on this.
The other thing is, I want to make sure if we don't have any more questions for the applicant, we can get potentially some public comments specifically for this address. Happy to consider those. I just want to make sure here, do we have any other questions for staff or applicant? I know we obviously can once we hear public comment, but just at this time. You're good? Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Tillman, we may call you back up. Thank you. If you want to have a seat, we'll then, let's go to do we have any online comments? Tammy, we'll address those first.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, do we have, and how do you want to do this? from a sign-in perspective, in the order they signed in, respect this specific property?
That's a good question. I know that we have a new method for signing in. I don't know how that gets notified to the board, so I'd probably just ask if there's public comment for the site.
Okay, do we have any public comment? Or what we'll do is we'll have you walk up. You can identify your name and address. Again, this is specific to this property. If it's a generalized comment, that will not be considered at this time, just to let you know that. So you can start lining up against the wall if you'd like, and we'll take them one by one.
Thank you.
Yep, please feel free to approach, just your name and address, and then your commentary with regard to the Toman residents, please, their application.
Bob Moffett, 5667 Kentfield Drive. So I'm actually in the same neighborhood, Dublin Brighton Park neighborhood. So first I want to say that I would certainly support anybody putting solar panels in, front or back. The thing that I think is maybe different than when the code was originally written, is that solar panels are now, they're all black, they're streamlined, they're low profile. It is different than when the panels were originally available to people. So I also think that the point that was made by Chris, and this is one that I didn't know he was going to say that, but 25% of the homes in a neighborhood are going to fall under this same orientation. And so it's somewhat by default, that 25% of the homeowners will be limited on their ability to put panels in. And I realize from a code standpoint, yeah, you can put them in. We're not stopping you from putting them in the back, but people aren't going to make that decision. And so we really are limiting 25% of Dublin residents from making a good financial and environmentally sound decision for their home. There you go. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Next, please, name and address.
Hello, my name is Kevin Wadsworth. I'm at 6240 Post Road. I'm actually the second applicant, but I had a couple things to say that I think are relevant to theirs as well. There's some things that are specific to my case, but some things that I think might be generally useful. Just talking about the efficiency a little bit as well, just to elaborate what they said. Some of the numbers, the Department of Energy and the NREL both have really good solar modeling. You might not have seen this, obviously. We've done a lot of research onto this. So the south-facing, like my house faces 178 degrees south, which sounds about the same as theirs. A south-facing panel versus a panel on the north side of the roof, the difference in solar gain that they will have over the course of a year is a factor of 5. So it's not just a little bit less efficient. Again, it's a factor of 5 different. So like when I looked at this as just a cost-effective measured way to generate energy. My current electric cost through AEP is about 15 cents a kilowatt hour. By putting a solar panel on the south side of my house over a 25-year period that is guaranteed to produce for, assuming it doesn't produce at all after 25 years, that works out to about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So that was my reason, half the price of what I'm paying to AEP right now for electricity. Obviously, I put that on the north side, that 7 cents a kilowatt hour goes to 35 cents a kilowatt hour. There's no reason to do that when you're paying 15 cents today to AEP. So that's a little bit of the background, I guess, of that difference in cost between the north and south side that might be useful to you. The other thing just to mention on the other house that you showed on Hawks Nest, before I signed a contract with Eco House Solar, they gave me some references of other people to talk to. One just was on Terra Hill, a street north of me, less than a mile. Theirs was installed in 2020. So it was permitted and all that through the building department. Went up and I talked to them. I looked at their system. Again, they have the same black panels on the roof. And again, theirs was allowed just in 2020. So I know you were instructed. I think the instruction of the code as an accessory, I'm not a lawyer, but to my reading, that's a stretch. That's somebody in Dublin deciding that we're going to come up with a reason to stop them from doing this. And we don't have something written in the code today, so we're going to kind of stretch this accessory code to make it fit. I don't think that's a great fit. And again, there's a lot of other houses in Dublin. 2020 was not that long ago. We're talking ancient history here, that have been permitted with the same type of panels to go into Dublin. So by not allowing them to do this, you're not allowing them to do things that their neighbors might have done just as recently as 2 years ago. So I think that is relevant as a point there. So those are the two things I wanted to say that I thought were relevant to their house. So thanks.
Thank you.
Jason, do you mind if I respond to that? Because I think that's an important Good.
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, he's going to be presenting anyway here in a little bit, but
Sure,
please
yeah.
feel free, Tammy, to
But
respond.
I think this is a general conversation, and this is probably a little more technical, and I'm going to try to keep this as simplistic as I can. And Jesse, of course, you can chime in. The difficult situation that we're in currently is the city of Dublin, minus the 3 locations that we discussed, Bridge Street, the West Innovation District, and the Dublin Corporate Area Plan. Minus those 3 locations, we do not have solar as a use in the city. So if we were just to go under those guidances, if it's not listed as a use, it's not permitted. So essentially, it could not be permitted anywhere. So we took it, the city took it upon themselves to say, until we can get a code in place that addresses this, we need to find a section that would at least allow for some implementation of solar. And that's when we identified, again, the best section that we could come up with, and that's accessory uses, that at least allows solar panels to the side and the rear. So we did that, and we understood that there were limitations to that until we can get a code in place. But we did that in hopes that there are properties that could take advantage of those benefits, so.
Thank you.
Jillian Dyer, 2273 Indiana Avenue. I'm actually here with EcoHouse with Kevin. I was just hoping I could provide some of the technical background. I know you said that you didn't consider production and functionality when you were coming up with some of the restrictions. So we actually don't install on the north side of houses in central Ohio. It's not worth it. People typically end up paying more for their solar than they would for just paying for electricity, which essentially does stop people who only have a north-facing roof on the back of the house from installing solar and having it be financially worth it at all. Also, in the winter, even if you are producing a little bit of power, maintenance of solar panels in the winter, technically they do sell brooms that you can sweep off the roof. We would not recommend ever actually doing that because you're more likely to actually damage the solar panels, trying to get the ice and debris or snow off of the panels, and then have to have somebody come out and fix it than you would be to actually clear the snow off. So if you have panels on the south side of a roof, the dark surface will help the snow melt more quickly, and then it'll start producing. So I just wanted to provide some of that, just because there is a plan that shows that you could put solar on the north-facing roof, doesn't mean that you should, or that it would be useful.
Thank you.
I did want to add one thing. The whole reason we provided the second north-facing option was at the behest of the city, saying it was a good idea to show how less efficient it would be. And as she just mentioned, our provider said he wouldn't recommend putting anything on the north side of a roof either. So I just wanted to add that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am David Shell. I live at 5582 Baybrook Lane, which is just adjacent. I'm at the other end of their cul-de-sac. And I fully support what they're trying to do. Personally, I almost feel like you've been very conservative about interpreting your codes, because to me, I can see where you've interpreted that it is an accessory, where you could also consider it's like a shingle, because you're doing the exact same function as shingle would be as well. So to me, I think you could make a case that the criteria is met in number one, and based on number one, number two and number three would fall in line. So to me, 2 and 3, they're almost like these built-in rejections that occur when number one happens. So to me, I feel like it's not that the code is saying that you can't do it. It's just that you're interpreting that you can't do it. So that's just my feeling on it.
Thank you.
And Jason, again, I know this is a very complicated conversation, but those policy decisions are not made with this board. So the fact that we've identified these as accessory structures is what the board is addressing.
Tammy, can you speak to the Tillman Residence's claim that you were the one to ask them to put the comparison up there?
Can you, I'm sorry, what was the latter part of that?
Yeah, he said that you recommended that they put up the second proposal to show how much worse it would be. Is that accurate, or Mr. Tillman, did I mischaracterize your mark?
The way the conversation went, we had a Zoom call. It was me, Tammy, someone else from the city, I can't remember who it was, and Bob from the solar provider. And he said, would it be helpful if I provided this for the back of the city? And Tammy said, yeah, add it to your application. So we did. He's kind of like, and he made it clear, you shouldn't do this. And so the intent of adding that back half of the house was, it was more of the intent to say, look at how bad of an idea this is. You shouldn't do it, is really what the intent was behind it. Not to say, oh, well, we could put it on the back, but we really would rather have it on the front.
Honestly, I would imagine that conversation, I would have, so our whole purpose, and this is a true statement, is to guide applicants into a good standing with the board. And so not knowing much about what that analysis would have brought, I can imagine that conversation was more of, we absolutely can't do it in another location and we have to do it in this location. To me, that would have been a discussion for the board. The fact that it's less efficient, I don't know that I anticipate that as a conclusion, but again, I can only speculate how we got here. We're really trying to put the applicants in the best standing and light that they can for the board.
Hi, I'm joining in here now. I just want to reiterate, we had the professional who works for the solar company, and she did mention that if you have this on the north side, it's not recommended because you're trying to clean the snow off, you will damage your solar panels.
And potentially yourself.
And potentially yourself. And with this not being the first time this is being discussed, meaning solar panels, I'm speculating, but I wonder if this has come up first time.
Are you asking a question?
I don't want to be accusatory.
No, but you were saying that you don't think this is the first time this has come up?
No, the mention of this, I'm fairly certain it's not the first time that it came up.
The solar panels discussion, or what specifically?
The inefficiency and need for the panels to be cleaned off the snow if they're installed on the north side of the house in central Ohio. Because all of these companies that operate here, I would imagine it's all the same.
Yeah, I know we heard commentary on that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Did your installer indicate what we heard from the other woman?
I was not the one working with the installer precisely, but my husband was, and the installer indicated that this was not the way to go.
I got it. Do we have any additional questions for the applicant, the staff? Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll call you back up if we need any clarification on anything.
I'm right here.
Okay.
Public comment.
Oh, sure. No, make sure the mic's on if you would, please.
Is that on? Yep. Hi, I'm Jill Rodaball. I'm at 6329 Conless Circle. Just on their case, you mentioned that there was a variance granted for a shed off the back. When it should be on the back, they did it on the front. To me, that's very analogous because theoretically, they could have built that shed on the back if they had spent probably a lot of money to build a very sophisticated infrastructure that would adjust off a cliff or whatever it would need to be. So to me, it's still you know, if they had spent a lot of money, they could have built that shed off the back of that house. So to me, that variance was granted, and for solar panels, I feel it's pretty much the same kind of argument. You should go ahead and grant. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Joe, did you want to start?
Yeah, I think the thing that we need to consider first is lots of great information brought to us tonight. I think what's missing is we're not the people. I think that's what's not happening. I think Tammy said, we don't write the code. We don't decide whether it's an accessory structure. So all of those arguments may be extremely valid. You're at the wrong place. That's what I would say for us to debate. So I don't. I mean, we're in the middle of a discussion, so.
Yeah,
This
ma'am,
is a hearing.
just real quick, if you'd like to have additional public comment, you're more than welcome to come back up and we'll acknowledge you. But chiming in and chirping from there is not appropriate. Okay.
So what I've heard is a lot of really solid arguments as to why there needs to be a change to the code, and this needs to be reevaluated and looked into. And I think at least I've heard from the city that they agree with that. And so I feel like there's a kind of divide between what's happening here, what we're tasked with deciding, and what's being asked. And so I feel like what's being asked is this shouldn't be the code, and that's not a decision I think we can all agree that we get to make any determination of. There was an argument that this shouldn't be an accessory structure, unless I hear otherwise, also not a determination that we're entitled to make, correct? So I don't want anyone to feel as if we're ignoring those statements. We just don't have any authority to do that. What we're tasked with is a very, very narrow subject that we can deal with. And I don't disagree with the comments that were made earlier. These standards and code section seem to be designed to make it very difficult to get a variance. I think that was the intent of making these, is to make it very difficult to get a variance. Again, not something we drafted. We don't have control over those. So I just kind of wanted to start our debate off by talking about what it is that we have to look at versus a lot of really valid and I think well-educated comments that have been made, but just are really important for planning and zoning and for city council, which neither of we have control over.
So with that in mind, the original, the substantial adverse effect clearly states impair the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied. And we have determined that solar panels were relatively shoehorned into this. That was the only way that they could get solar panels to be permitted, period, was if they shoehorned it into this requirement. So the intent and purpose of the requirement being varied, that's so that people don't build pools in their front yard, or so that they don't build a shed just like right in the middle of the front yard really ugly, or do anything like that, or they build right on the boundary line between there and their neighbor's house, and they build this giant wall of a shed right next to their neighbor's property line. That's what the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied are. The intent and purposes of the requirement being varied in this case is ostensibly about solar panels being an accessory structure, but they were shoehorned into that requirement. If you said like the example of shingles was given earlier, if these were solar shingles, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Because why? Because they're not an accessory structure that happens to be shoehorned into this requirement. So personally for me, the substantial adverse effect, just by the language of the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied, is relatively invalid.
If I could just jump in on that briefly, just on that criteria. I just want to be clear when we read that there's really two clauses in that third criteria. So there's a substantial adverse effect to property or improvements in the vicinity, or will not materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement. And I think what staff is saying is that permitting them in the front materially impairs the intent and purposes of the requirement rather than causes a substantial adverse effect to the property or improvements.
Okay. In that case, I'd like to talk about the other side of the coin, which is what we're trying to prevent with this requirement is, again, somebody building a pool in their front yard and it being an eyesore or something like that. What the adverse effect of, in this case, Zillow, a 2019 study, adding solar panels to your house raised the house price by 4.1%. So it doesn't have a negative effect to the house. In fact, it raises the value of the house. 80% of buyers say energy efficient features are important when they're buying a house, so they would be more inclined to buy solar panels. And then if we're talking about the neighbor's perception of solar panels, which I know is a big, like a NIMBY talking point in Dublin, is there haven't been any studies on the neighboring land value other than full-scale commercial solar being installed, like a giant solar field. But houses selling for 4.1% more in your neighborhood because they have solar panels increases the comp value for all the houses in the neighborhood. If you're looking at a house in the neighborhood and Zillow is now seeing all of these houses selling for 4.1% more than they were originally, if you had multiple houses install solar panels in the neighborhood, that raises the price of all of the houses in the neighborhood. So I don't see how there can be a substantial adverse effect of somebody installing solar panels in their neighborhood if it raises home values for that house and for the surrounding houses.
Do you have additional commentary? Do you want to say what you're feeling on this? I mean, it sounds like you're in favor of passing.
For the third requirement, I think the third requirement doesn't make sense in any of these cases tonight. I don't think it causes a substantial adverse effect, and I don't think the requirement was originally designed to fulfill this. So I would say the criteria is met for this particular case that we have in front of us for requirement 3.
Are you saying you grant a variance in this case? That's the question.
Based solely on requirement 3, yes. Now, I need to address 1 and 2 still, but I would say 3, it hits it for me. The criteria should be met.
Well, but we have to match all 3 criteria, right? So do you believe it meets 1 and 2?
So the number 2 is the next one I'm going to talk about, applicant action and inaction. And what we have found in this board in the past is if somebody wants to build, for instance, the shed that we were talking about, there is nothing preventing somebody from building a shed in their backyard. If they want to build in their shed in their backyard, then that's perfectly fine. Where we run into the problem with the action and inaction is not whether somebody wants to build a shed, but whether somebody wants to build a shed in this particular case that would cause the variance to be required. So for instance, the shed that we were talking about previously, they had a very steep gradient in their backyard. There was a sharp drop off. They were a weird flag-shaped lot that was set far back from the road. There was really no other place on the entire property that they could build the shed. So it was not the fact that they wanted to build the shed, it was the fact that they had to build the shed in this particular location. So what we found in that case was it was not their action of wanting to build the shed, it was their action of wanting to build a shed in this particular location because of the geography of the land. Now, we've heard from the solar panel providers, and we heard from the family in this particular case, that if they're wanting to build solar panels on the north-facing roof of their house, that's just a no-go. They say that the snow is dangerous, it's way less efficient. If they're trying to remove the snow, they're facing potential injury from getting on the roof when it's snowy and icy out. And based on the fact that the solar provider didn't originally want to give even an estimate of the first one, or of the north side of the house, and the other 2 cases that we're seeing tonight, which we'll get to later, don't provide that estimate, I feel like we would be penalizing these applicants for providing us the comparison, because we've heard from solar industry professionals and we've heard from the homeowners that this is not something that is recommended. So it's not the fact that they're wanting to build solar panels on their house that is the problem. It's that they literally can't build solar panels anywhere other than the south-facing side of the house.
If I may, I wanted to add, I will add this, we didn't go to just one solar provider. We had multiple, and as soon as we got to the point where we did the research and said Dublin doesn't allow solar panels on the street-facing side of a property, 2 of the 3 providers immediately said, sorry, we can't help you. It was only the one who said, well, I'll go with you to fight a variance request. So I suppose I probably could have added that earlier and I forgot, but we did have multiple providers come out, give a quote, and 2 of which completely backed out, and it was only the 1 that said they would support us in this case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's useful. So we get these people, they're getting the solar panel providers coming out to their house and saying, we would love to install solar panels on your house. The only place that we could possibly do it is on the south-facing side of the house, which is facing the road. And 2/3 of the people saying, oh, we can't do that, sorry. I wouldn't say that's applicant action. I would say their action was wanting to build solar panels on their house, and that's the same thing as wanting to build a shed. They want to build a shed, they want to install solar panels. The only viable place is on the front of the house. The only viable place is to the side of the house with that shed example. So we found that criteria met in that other condition. We should find the criteria met in this condition.
Do you want to comment on the special condition aspect?
All right, so the special conditions, this is the one that I've struggled with the most. The site is similar in size to the adjacent property. Tammy makes that comment. Along with the adjacent properties, they're all southern facing. There are no special conditions. And the applicant did say specifically, the special condition is that like 25% of all the houses in Dublin just straight up can't install solar. If you have a house that faces the street towards the south, then you are completely barred from it. And the city knows this, and they're working on changing the code. They're working on navigating around. We are held to these very specific criteria, the special conditions. And in this case, the pitch of the roof is 32%. With the pitch of the roof being 32%, that's around a 50% drop in efficiency for solar panels. The sun in Ohio obviously doesn't shine on the north side of the houses. If you have a low pitched roof, like if you had a flat roof or something, that would be a non-issue. You could build it wherever. If you start getting into higher pitched roofs, it becomes harder and harder and harder to build solar panels onto the other side. So I would say that this house's special condition is A, the fact that there are a bunch of houses in Dublin actually strikes me as a valid argument. There's nothing else, Tammy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing else in the Dublin code that says essentially all the houses on this side of the street can't do X. Is there?
What is X?
It could be anything, like you can't connect to the city water, you can't build a fence, like just by the nature of your house being on the north side of the street, you can't do anything, something.
I would say there's locational requirements for many of our sections. So I would be hesitant to answer that point blank.
Okay. So a lot of times the locational requirements are things like there's an additional setback required or things like that, for context of what we're talking about. But and some of the houses, like if we talked previously, another issue is people with like side loaded garages force the house to be set further back into the property. And so anybody with the side loaded garage has a much more difficult time building a patio in their backyard. That's something that in the past we've found as a special condition, that the fact that their house was built in a slightly different configuration from their neighbors was enough of the special condition, even though there are other houses in that neighborhood that also have side-loaded garages that just didn't happen to come before us. So I would argue the fact that it affects 25% of Dublin is actually a problem. It's a special condition with this house. The pitch of the roof being 32%, and that completely prevents it from getting the solar panels. And then the last part of this criteria is whereby the literal enforcement of the requirements would provide practical difficulties. And a lot of the times we're interpreting that discussion point as, oh, you can't build a shed because the practical difficulties associated with that are like in the building phase or things like that. The practical difficulties in this case is there is no way to build a solar panel on the north side of the house without the sun not working. Like the practical difficulty is the lifetime achievement of these solar panels. You're not going to get the same efficiency. You're going to have to spend way more money on the solar panels for a worse result. They're not going to be economical. It's just worthless to build the solar panels here. So the special conditions, the practical difficulty is the fact that you cannot build the solar panels in any other location aside from the south side of the house.
I have a question. Chris, can you come back up for me, please? I'm sorry. Your home is located, is it governed by like HOA documents or anything like that? Do you know?
I have a representative from the HOA here.
Okay,
so
good.
he can maybe speak to it.
Can you state your name again, sir? I don't remember it.
What, my name's Bob Moffett.
Okay, Bob, there's an HOA?
There's an HOA. I've been the treasurer for, 12, 15 years or so.
Do we know, is there any kind, and this is just for point of clarification, just from this understanding, is there any kind of code restrictions or regulations that are set forth within your HOA governing code of regulations or declarations?
So the two pieces, there's 3 requirements, more or less, in the HOA. You got to have a certain mailbox, which fell to the wayside long ago. You can't put in a satellite dish because the HOA code was written when a satellite dish was the size of a car. When small satellite dishes came around, they went up all over. It was never mentioned. And the third thing is on fences, and you follow the Dublin City Code on fences. That's about all that the HOA gets into on requirements.
Okay.
You can't have a clothesline, I guess.
No clothesline?
Yeah, kind of weird. I'd change that one.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you both. So Robin, it sounds as if you just gave a lot of definition, explanation, your thoughts. It sounds as if you'd be in favor of granting the variance in this instance. Is that fair?
I would be, but if you all have arguments why any of my findings are wrong, I'm also willing to entertain those. But I think personally for me, 2 and 3 are very strongly, the argument that I laid out means that they're met. 1 is the one that I struggled with by far the most. And I would like to hear y'all's comments and feedback.
I'll save mine for the end. We've heard Joe's. Patrick, why don't you go ahead?
Well, first of all, can I ask, are there any special deed provisions that would preclude you from installing solar panels? I know it doesn't really govern the decision of this board, but I just wanted to make sure.
No, none to my knowledge.
Okay. So to your points about the special conditions, how 25% of the homes in Dublin wouldn't be able to enjoy the benefits of solar panels just generally, I think that's a fairly compelling case. And I think if you couple that with the inclement weather that we can have in Dublin and the risks that you face, not just with the efficiency of the panels themselves in the wintertime, but also in their maintenance, if they were placed in a certain area of the home, you would run into those similar, that would create some additional special conditions that would compound that. Are we just discussing the special conditions right now, or are we all 3?
Why don't you run down all 3 of them like
Okay.
Robin did?
And to that point too about how it's necessitated or how it becomes necessary. Point number 2. I suppose it depends on our definition of necessitates. I do see the risk of their maintenance being a compelling part to that. Component of that. Also, the additional utility charges and their maintenance and cleaning and defrosting or whatever it would take. I think that would also be something that is a major consideration, especially if it would put the homeowner in harm's way. With respect to the third, pairing the intent and purpose requirements. I think if we're looking at the intent of the code, there's an incongruence here between what we normally see with these variances. Going back to the example of the shed, it was a flag-shaped shed. There was a sloping backyard. The reason why he wanted to install the shed in his front yard was that was the only viable area for it. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be feasible to have it in that area. And I think, again, for the reasons stated above, given the maintenance, the risk that it runs, the necessity of these, the necessity that comes from maintaining the property or maintaining the panels in the manner that would be efficient for their use and the safety of the homeowner, I would say that would also fall in line with the not creating a substantially adverse effect on the property. So I'm inclined to side with your arguments on that end.
Joe?
I have some questions for the city. So, because I think we've had this happen now twice. Let's start with number 3. We've heard now these 2 comments of it doesn't impair the other homes. Can you clarify again the impairment on the code? And so what I interpreted what you said as, and I want to make sure because this is very important to me, if it were to directly impact the intent of the code, if the code is to not have someone have it on a certain facing element, if we were to grant that variance, we would be doing exactly the opposite of what the intent is. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes. So what I'm saying is that that language will not materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied. The requirement being varied, I know the called out examples in the code are swimming pools and sheds, but the requirement that the city has determined to apply is accessory uses. And the code says accessory uses are not permitted on the front of the structure. And so what we're saying under 3 is that if you allow an accessory use in the front of the structure, then you are materially impairing the intent and purposes of the requirement.
So I kind of want to discuss that amongst us first. So I heard both of your arguments about the other section of this portion of the code. So if the intent of the code is to not permit an accessory structure on the front of the property, how is granting an accessory structure on the front of the property not contrary to that intent?
Will not materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement being varied. So when I hear that materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement, I'm hearing they don't want people having giant sheds in the front lawn because that makes the houses look ugly and it decreases materially the resale value of other houses in the neighborhood and the tax base. The city is looking out for the tax base, they're looking out for the taxpayers. They're not going to allow people to build something that is going to cause the house values to drop in the city. They're not going to allow people to build a very ugly swimming pool in the front yard. Materially impair implies that there is a downside to whatever variance happens. And as I laid out, solar panels materially are a good thing for the neighborhood. They're a good thing for the city. So I don't see how it materially.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I don't think you're hearing what he's saying. And this is where I'm trying to see if I can get behind your argument. I'm not saying solar panels are good or bad. That's not what this code isn't written about solar panels. It says it materially impairs the intent of the code. And it doesn't say, so the code is written to not permit structures on the front facing portion of it. So it doesn't say if they add value or don't add value. The intent of the code is to not permit them. And so what I'm trying to understand in your argument, because I want to see if I can get behind it, is, let's assume for a second that everyone agrees solar panels are great. All the arguments today are great. We think the city should change the code. This says we have to find that allowing an accessory structure on the front facing portion of a property is not materially impairing a decision that is exactly the opposite of that. So that's where I'm trying to.
Gotcha. So
I'm going to hold, you're going to be an applicant, so you've already had an opportunity for public comment. If the applicant wants to come up, that's fine. No, you're going to have your opportunity. You've had an opportunity to speak. We're going to try to get this moving. So Robin, if you want to go ahead.
So let's go back to what is the purpose of the requirement from the city again?
The purpose, let me pull it and make sure I read the right language. It will not materially impact the intent and purpose of the requirement being varied. So we have to ask, or of this chapter, which is the general zoning chapter. So we have to ask, what is the requirement being varied? And we go back to the code for require. This is the code. This is 153.074 H6, I believe, 6. All accessory uses and structures, including swimming pools and associated decking, shall be constructed within the permitted buildable area of a lot behind all applicable setback lines and to the rear or side of the principal structure. So what is being varied here is that last clause, and to the rear or side of the principal structure.
But what is the purpose of that requirement?
My interpretation would be the purpose would be to keep things behind the rear or side of the principal structure. And Tammy can speak if I'm.
That's true. It's that simple.
So the purpose is to keep things behind the house regardless of what they are.
To keep accessory structures behind the front of the house. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So the language too also mentions behind all applicable setback lines. I mean, the setback lines are adjacent to the property lines. And then it's followed by to the rear and side of the principal structure. I mean, doesn't this code really sort of speak more to the setbacks and boundaries of the property itself, not necessarily the structures themselves on the improvements on the property?
I mean, I understand that argument. I would say that the plain reading of it is that accessory uses are to be kept behind the rear or side of the principal structure. I can't ignore the plain language of it.
So just to move our conversation forward, I think it's very, very clear to us that this needs to be changed, and I see the city doing it. The problem is I feel handcuffed by what we have been given. We didn't make the determination it's an accessory structure. I just can't get there for the special condition. Saying 25% of the homes have it tells me very much so that the city needs to address this immediately and to move forward with it. I just can't get there. So as much as I might want to, and as much as I think the city needs to do something, I think that once this has been changed, I think there's actually going to be an even better situation. And so I will tell you what my belief is. I think that all the applicants should table and go to the planning and zoning and city council, because I think there's some really great arguments that are being made, and they can make this across the board sweeping change that I think seems very pertinent. And I think that I just think from what we're tasked with doing, I can't get to where I think it needs to go, but I think the city can get there and can if 25% of the people are impacted, I think that says right there it's something that should be put in the forefront and dealt with right away.
Did you want to have additional commentary?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Mr. Nye. If the way it sounds like you're interpreting the code, to me it feels like any variance request will impair the purpose of the code, right? Like that's what you're saying. You're asking how you try to get my words right here. The way you're phrasing your argument in that, does this impair the spirit or the purpose of the written code? I feel like, doesn't every variance request challenge that stance?
Certainly think it could. Again, didn't write these three, didn't say that's there. And I will tell you can go back and look. I probably on the sitting board right now voted for more variances than anybody in here right now. So
no,
I really don't like how we're handcuffed, but
yeah,
I didn't write them, and I guess stuck with them.
It's just maybe my ignorance to the whole process, considering this is the first time I've ever even seen anything like this. It's just questioning the purpose of the process. If the interpretation is basically that every variance is every variance request should fail based off the interpretation.
I think it's the material impair part of it, but I understand your argument. I think it's very valid. It's like I think a lot of things that have been said here are extremely valid. I don't think that I haven't heard any of us make a comment that any of this is being dismissed. I just I'll just tell you from my personal perspective, we have this tiny narrow window that we're able to operate in, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that the city has to deal with that I think all of this information is extremely valid and they should take into consideration. It's just, this isn't the body to make all those changes that need to be made. We're only tasked with applying this very strict, and I agree with you when you said that earlier, very strict standard that we have to apply.
Thank you.
Sure.
My question is very general. If it looks like there's nothing that can be done within your power, Sir Knight, or possibly any four of you, so why are we given a chance to have this meeting and spend our time in preparation and showing up and debating? Why is this taking place right now if there's nothing that can be done for us?
I mean, I think that's an important discussion, and I know this feels very adversarial, and it's not meant to be adversarial. It's meant, and we're all in a difficult position, right? So the city has this opportunity to allow, in some instances, solar panels. In this particular instance, it requires review for the Board of Zoning Appeals. So this gives you the opportunity to address those criteria and perhaps sway the board that you meet the criteria. And it's meant to be a difficult task. It's meant to, if in all instances, if you could meet the code, you will meet the code. So I guess my takeaway, if I were in another person's position, it would be you're given the opportunity to address the criteria and suggest that you have no other options, basically.
I do agree with that. We do not have east or west facing roof, and we do not have any other options. This is why we're here. And frankly, I feel like I'm asking to put outhouse in the front yard. Thank you.
I'm going to try to sum this up real quick. Robin, you're yes, right?
That's correct.
Patrick, you're yes.
That's correct.
Okay, so Joe's no on the mic for me.
Correct.
Okay, so here's what I'm gonna state, and it's kind of what I said earlier. I feel this board is placed in a difficult situation as a gap until the city has its code. It's just the nature of what's going on. Unfortunately, they've identified what these conditions are. I'm very reluctant to grant a variance where there could be some precedent for this gap period. Frankly, I think it's a difficult ask of us. I'm not even going to address 2 and 3 because I can't get past 1 in this specific instance. It's not a special condition. And there's significant examples in the code that have been discussed, or actually that haven't been discussed with regard to the type of property and the topography and the development. The other thing is, and I don't think you built the house, right? You chose to move into, I know how ridiculous it sounds, but you chose to move into a home that faces the south. Again, I'm just trying to interpret the code and what we've done before. For me, it's a no. Let's just going to jump to it. So as of now, with 4 on the panel, you're going to be rejected. Now, the good thing is, as we heard at the beginning, you have an opportunity either to table the decision, or you can essentially get voted down now and then resubmit at another time with an alteration. The other thing is the city code is going to address situations like this. It's simply improper for us to deal with code that's going to be addressing south-facing homes in the future, because I have a feeling you're going to be able to get exactly what you want with the code, and you're not going to need to go to a board to get it. So that's a great question that I do not know the answer to. I'd like to tell you as soon as possible.
I'd like to have had it happen before today. We're as Jason was saying, it's unfortunate. Well, and I want to address that. We have no control. We're a separate entity that we're not part of city council. We're not part of planning and zoning. We don't have any authority over them. They didn't So just so everyone knows, that's not we couldn't have pushed this through. We can't write it. We don't have any authority over those things at all. We're a completely separate entity. And as Jason said, I think we're kind of tasked with a very unique situation of saying, hey, what's this code going to be hopefully in a couple of months? And so, I mean, I think that they anticipate a lot of public comment from what we've heard. And so I think that's great. I think the city encourages that. It's one of the things that's great about Dublin. And I think, I don't know if there's a way we can put up something for people to streamline that information, but just given what we're doing right now, I'm in the same thing as you, as creating a variance for a very small window.
The other thing too, if you are so set on getting this as soon as possible, okay, there's a possibility you could table the decision and then the fifth member could be present. And at that point in time, you could convince that person. You've already convinced two when the city was rejecting, right, disapproving. So you've had an opportunity to convince two. There may be an opportunity to convince the member that's absent this evening if you would do so. I mean, that's your option. I agree with you, just, from a personal standpoint. I'd like you to have the south-facing panels. It's just the way with the structure we have in front of us and what we're tasked with, I can't get there. So if you want to come up and let us know your decision, that's fine. If you need a few minutes, we can break for a minute. Can you come up to Mr. Toman, can you come up real quick and state for the record for me, please?
Why don't you guys take a break, however long that typically is?
No, I mean, if you want a break to figure out if you.
We'll take a
All
break.
right, why don't we take 5 minutes? Okay, thanks, Tammy.
No, we've never been able to take a break, so we don't typically get one. So thanks.
We do.
Everybody, could you please sit back down, please? We're gonna reset. Thank you. Obviously a little bit longer break, but I think that was needed for everybody. Mr. Toman, have you decided from a tabling perspective?
Yes, we'll table till a later date, whether that's next meeting or, whenever
Okay.
we can come back.
Yes, so we're going to do this. May I have a motion as requested? So we have a request from the applicant to table, and this is on Toman Residence at 5692 Rich Grove Lane. That's case number 22-112V with regard to the non-use area variance. Do we have a motion to table?
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
Roll.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Mr. Nye,
Yes.
Mr. Clower,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy.
Yes.
Mr. Toman, thank you so much for your time and patience with you and your wife. I know it was a bit strenuous and contentious at times, but really do appreciate it. And I hope we'll be able to get to a resolution that's beneficial for everybody.
Yep. Thank you all very much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to alter the order here from a case perspective. The Yee residence is the third case that will move up to the second case now. This is at 6056 Bridges Close Drive. That's case number 22-131V. It's a non-use area variance with regard to solar panels on street-facing facade. Could we have applicant's representative approach, please? Good evening. Could you state your name and address for me?
Yes, my name is Sal Pareja. I live at 397 Hampton Way, and I'm representing the Yee residents.
Perfect. So it's my understanding that there's been a request to table this case for a future date. Is that fair?
Correct, yes.
Okay. May we have a motion to table the case at 56 Bridges Close Drive? That's case number 22-131V with regard to a non-use area variance for solar panels on the street-facing facade.
I move to table that case 22-131V.
Second, please.
Second.
Roll.
Thank you.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Mr. Clower,
Yes.
Mr. Nye.
Yes.
Thank you. And then we'll move to former case number 2, which is now case number 3, the Wadsworth residence at 6240 Post Road.
And for clarification, if you don't feel like you need to be here anymore, if your case is done, you are free to leave at any time. If you would like to stick around and offer public comment, that's also fine.
The third case is now the Wadsworth residence at 6240 Post Road. That's case number 22-130V, non-use area variance. And for specifics, this is an application for a variance to allow building-mounted residential solar panels as an accessory structure located on street-facing facade on a 1.32 acre site zoned Planned Unit Development District, Indian Run Meadows. The site is located 250 feet northwest of the intersection of Post Road with Holt Drive. Case presentation for staff this evening is by Zach Hounsell. Zach?
Great, good evening. Before you tonight is a non-use area variance for the Wadsworth residence. The site is highlighted in yellow on your screen. This home is located north of Post Road within the Indian Run Meadows neighborhood. This is a PUD. The site is fairly rectangular in size with the 4 property lines. From the maximum lot depth is approximately 312 feet, and that would be the west property line. And the lot width is approximately 149 feet at the front property line. The site is located centrally on the site in a setback 53 feet from the west property line, 31 feet from the east property line, and 120 feet from Post Road. As you'll see here on the aerial, there are a number of mature trees that are located along Post Road, as well as a stand of mature vegetation to the rear, as there is a stream that does cross along the northern property line. And this is just to show a view from the southern property line. This is Post Road as you're driving from east to west. You can see the driveway and then the front facade of the home. So as we have discussed in length here regarding solar panels and the requirements within the zoning code, residential solar panels are not currently listed as specific uses within code, except in the West Innovation District, Bridge Street District, and the Dublin Corporate Area Plan. To allow solar panels within our code currently, city utilizes zoning code section 153-074B6A, which speaks towards accessory uses and the location of accessory structures. All accessory structures are required to be constructed within the permitted buildable area of the lot, behind all applicable setback lines and to the rear or side of the principal structure. In order to have solar panels on front facades, the Board of Zoning Appeals is required to review variances in these cases, and that is what is applicable tonight. So shown on the screen is a proposed site plan. This is just the aerial with the location of the solar panels being shown on the front facade, the south-facing facade. As stated, this is a request for a variance to zoning code section 153-074 that addresses the location of accessory structures for residential development. The applicant is proposing approximately 31 panels located on the south-facing roof face as shown on the screen. The applicant has provided an applicant statement, and they are here tonight, and they will be able to address their reasoning for the variance request. So as staff has reviewed this application based on the variance review criteria, staff has found that the three criteria shown on the screen have not been met. First, with the special conditions, that this site does not have any special conditions, as it is similar in that it is south-facing, as a number of neighboring sites do have the same condition. The applicant action inaction, which is stated on the screen, and switching to renewable energy, as that was an action of the applicant. And third would be the allowing accessory structures forward of the building would impair the intent of this requirement. Staff has found that 2 of the 4 criteria are met for the non-use variance requirements here, which does meet the requirements, as 2 of the 4, a minimum of 2, are required to be permitted or met here. So with this, staff has reviewed and are recommending disapproval of the non-use area variance to the zoning code section for accessory structure. I'm happy to answer any questions there may be for staff. Otherwise, our applicant, Mr. Wadsworth, is here to address any questions and concerns. Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
The west side property line, do you know how far that is from the west side of the house to the setback? The no build zone setback on the west side?
Are you saying the setback for
like if they elected to build a shed in between their house on the west side and the west side property line, what's the furthest setback on the west hand side or west side?
I can pull that up for you.
Thank you.
Until we get that answer.
Sure, no problem. Robin, do you have any more questions? Patrick, questions for staff? No good? Zach, do you want us to wait? I can have the applicant come up.
Yeah, if you want to continue, I'll let you know when I have it.
Mr. Wadsworth, is that? Do you want to again state your name and address for the record, please?
Kevin Wadsworth. I'm the homeowner at 6240 Post Road, Dublin. Most of the background you've already heard for they were similar to the previous case. So about why we're interested in solar. A couple of things that just to address on the special criteria. I think there's a couple of things that do set our house apart from the previous applicant and from others. One, just as a background, you're probably aware that the houses on the north side of Post Road are on septic systems. We don't have access to city sewer there. So as part of that, that makes the entire front yard of my house is my leach bed. So I can't plant any trees or anything there because that would interfere with the function of the leach bed. So that partly that gives us a lot of solar gain on our house, particularly in the summer. So our electric use is quite high because we run air conditioner because we don't have any shading on the house. That also is what makes us a good candidate for solar. We have a south-facing house with no shade on it, so that gives us a really good usage of our solar panels. But it also necessitates the use of higher amount of electricity for us. The other thing's different. Again, we're not in a neighborhood. We're along Post Road, which is a rural character road. There's no sidewalk in front of our house. And we are set back 120 feet from the road and with heavy mature trees. He showed you the picture of the front of our house just down our driveway. That is the only place you can see our house from. I'm not sure if it was included in the package or not, but I took a picture of our house from across the street from the walking path, just eye level across the street. You can't see our house at all. All you see is 30-foot tall pine trees. So from that perspective, I think we're different than a lot of other houses in Dublin that make us pretty unique, and that we are visually screened from our neighbors. Our neighbors to the east are here as well. Again, trees were planted back in the 60s between our houses there. Very difficult to even see our houses from each other. So that makes us fairly secluded. And if again, I think the underlying assumption of the code is that, hey, solar panels are ugly, they're bringing down the character of the neighborhood, we don't want them. I disagree with that, but even if that were accepted as true, you can't really see our roof from the street, from our neighbors. So from that perspective, I think addressing that first special criterion, I think that's one thing that sets us apart, and that's why I wanted to raise that and go ahead with this here. That's about all I have to say. That's not unique and hasn't been said in the previous hour or two. So, any questions for me?
Do you have any questions for the applicant?
I do not.
I would like to hear, because you asked for the variance, or not the west side yard setback, right?
Right.
Let me ask, I think I know what Robin is asking. Have you thought of something where to the west of your home having panels on the ground?
Ground mount panels instead there. First, I think I've done only less research into that than roof mounted. In general, they're disfavored. I think the Eco House might be able to teach this more than I can. I think they generally are more expensive to install than roof mounted ones by a fair amount. So again, the main reason I was doing this is I use a lot of electricity and I was looking for a cheaper source of electricity. So if they were more expensive, also, I think my neighbors in general think those were less attractive than ones on the roof. On the roof, they're just black panels up on the roof that you don't really look at. A giant ground mount array, I think, would attract attention from the neighbors. So I'd take the cheaper option that I think looks better. That's why I would choose the roof mounted versus a ground mount system to the west.
Yeah, but it's fair to assume, though, that you did not get a separate quote where you would have those ground mounted panels.
Correct. I'm not going to quote. I've done some research that indicate they're more expensive, but did not get it.
It's my understanding too, from a ground mounted perspective, that there's a possibility that you'll be able to get a tracking mechanism that would actually follow the direct sunlight, that you would be able to harness additional energy.
Correct. Those are only used in commercial systems, really. They're not cost effective for homeowner systems. They're used for commercial utility scale systems, not for homeowner systems.
And I do have the setback. So at most, the side yard setback would be 8 feet. That's the requirement we have with R1. Within the Indian Run Meadows neighborhood, it's a minimum of 5 feet. But our staff has been going back and forth regarding to make sure that the zoning is correct on our discovery. So at most, it would be 8 feet here.
Can you pull up that picture of the home again from I think it was like the top down.
The yellow line.
Yeah.
The yellow line.
I think. Yes.
Zach, I know the app. Were you asking a question? I'm sorry. I was just thinking out loud. Sorry. Zach, I know the applicant said that they were not necessarily interested in this just because of the cost of it, but if there was the ability in space to get the correct angle to install a structure that would not be on the front side of the home, on the ground, that would be some way to capture solar, and I know they'd have to run the line of the house and stuff. Is that something that would be permitted otherwise, or is it, I mean, is that the front of the house the only thing that you have an issue with on this one? Is there a way that it could be removed from the roof, not on the front of the house, and be permitted, or do you not know that answer? You guys didn't look into it.
So ground-mounted solar panels are considered accessory structures in our zoning code. So they would need to meet the requirements for accessory structures.
Okay.
So that would be to the side or rear as well.
Okay, and would you remind us what the definition of side of the house is in this case?
Typically, so we would assign that with side yard setback or rear yard setback. So side would be anything behind the front plane of the home. So in this, you would draw a horizontal line there from the front face of the front plane of the home. And then rear would be anything from the back plane of the home moving further back.
So they're allowed to build solar panels to the side of the house that's behind the front plane of the home, but they're not allowed to build solar panels that are on the front of the house that are behind the front plane of the home.
That's correct.
I mean, the applicant would have to submit an additional variance. Well, he may not have to though, right? If it falls within the code. How would that work? This is under the assumption that you would get a quote and you're like, okay, fine, I'll deal with it on the side of the house. I just want to make sure so you understand everything. So how would this go?
So if, and you're speaking towards ground-mounted solar.
Ground mounted, and it's not past the front of the house. It would be next to the house.
Yeah, so if it were to meet the location requirements, meet setbacks, they would be permitted to go to building permitting.
Right, so you would be able to do it without having to come to the board here. I'm not saying that is what you're going to do. I'm just saying that does present an option for you to get it in the near term rather than waiting for when planning and zoning and city council approve the recommendations for potential, the installation of that. And obviously we don't know what those look like.
I think it also addresses the precedent issue. It's not creating a precedent because it would not be before us. It would thus eliminate this whole portion of it. If you could meet those criteria, the city could approve it. You would not have to come here. It would just be green lighted to go ahead and install it without us having to go through all these criteria and weigh this. Just,
But that's a different system that I'm asking for too.
Right.
understand. Part of what we do is try to help people find ways to get what they want with that. If there's,
I'm trying to help you come.
So,
come up with the
Zach,
answer.
let's say they built a shed in that area that had the front plane of the shed extends at the same plane of the roof and just extends the entire width of the roof. So it opens up twice as much roof space that they would be able to put solar panels on. And then they built this shed and then put solar panels on the shed. It's an accessory structure on the side of the house. Would that be allowed?
Getting tricky. So they would be, as long as the shed is meeting the accessory structure requirements, they would be, that's a great question. Tammy, you want to?
It seems simplistic, but that's exactly it. We need to be able to identify it being to the side or the rear. We're not trying to make this difficult. So whatever that looks like. And again, we don't have much experience with anything past building mounted solar panels, as well as we have talked to some applicants about freestanding solar panels. But again, we're looking for avenues to help. And if we can indicate that it meets those criteria, we would send them to building permits.
so, and then there's a scenario where there's an accessory structure on an accessory structure, right? So they could put they could put a shed to the west side or the left side of the screen, put solar panels on that, and then it'll be an accessory structure with an accessory structure?
I mean, honestly, not to get into too much semantics, but I would call it an accessory structure. Whether there's two components to it, one component to it, it's an accessory structure.
Just trying to anticipate things that may be asked of us. So thank you.
Just to jump in, I fully recognize what appears to be incongruence of allowing it on the front of the shingles of the house, not counting it the same plane as the side. But if you step back and take the plain reading of what those words mean, it's the fact that an accessory structure is being placed on the front of the house, not in the side yard of the house. So there is, I understand you could play out those games like that, certainly. I just want to point that out.
Do we have any additional questions for the applicant?
I do not.
So in terms of the topography of the, let's say the side and back of the yard, is there anything that we might not be seeing from this angle? Is there like a downward slope that might impede?
The back slopes quite a bit, about where the tree line starts or a little in front of that. Because again, there's what the South Fork Indian Run, North Fork Indian Run runs is the north border of our property. And the house probably sits about topography 20 feet above that probably. So there's a pretty steep drop there. So yeah, the backyard, the north is shaded by trees and by slope.
Sure.
The west is just flat grass.
Gotcha. I was just trying to see if there would be anything that would encumber you from putting that structure either on the side or the back of the.
Okay, the back is shaded by the house and by trees. The west side is not there.
Sure.
So but
Would it be slanting in any direction on the west side of the property?
not appreciably, no.
Okay.
Zach, are you looking for something over there?
I was going to bring up contours if you would like to see them.
We're
Okay.
trying to see what kind of topography we're dealing with, because I do know there's significant grade in this area.
So they're somewhat challenging to see on the big screen. I apologize. I'll try and zoom in as best as possible, but each line that is shown represents 2 feet of grade. So this would show that the property does slope back towards the rear to the north. It looks like there's about 2 to 4 feet of slope from the rear of the home to the mature vegetation.
So it looks to me like you were correct. To the west side of your home seems pretty flat, and then the back has the slope. So I think that shows exactly what you're
I've been
saying.
mowing it for 20 years, so.
Seems like you're exactly right.
Do we have any additional questions for staff or the applicant? Mr. Wadsworth, you want to have a seat and we'll call you up if need be. We'll have some real quick. Are there any public comments? We can have them come up.
Hi again. I'm Jillian Dyer, 2273 Indiana Avenue with Eco House Solar. Just to address the ground mount issue, if we were to put a ground mount on the side of the house, it looks like it might fit there. If you stacked 3 up, we typically would only do 2. We don't do a lot of suburban residential ground mounts. They're too big. They also cost a lot more to maintain. There's a lot more opportunity for animals to come to on wires. You have to maintain all the vegetation underneath to make sure it's not growing up and damaging any of the equipment. It's also typically a little more dangerous to have everything right there on the ground if you don't have it fenced off. So we do more rural ground mounts than we would in the city or the suburbs. Also, I'm not sure what Dublin's stance would be on trenching for a ground mount on a property with septic. But I know Delaware has some pretty intense restrictions on that, and it could result in some really convoluted trenching and wiring, and that would up the material costs. And then also to address the rotational mounts, that's not something that we install. I don't know that anybody in Columbus would install that for residential solar. Yeah. Yeah, and then I also wanted to add, we in November of 2020 installed a system on the front roof of a house at 5676 Tara Hill Drive. So I would say that maybe this isn't an individual special circumstance, but if we have people who've moved into a home at a time when they would have been allowed to install solar on the front of the house and now they can't, there's just not really any way that you could reasonably expect somebody to foresee that happening, especially if it hasn't been written into the code. So really what's being enforced is not something that is specifically written. It wasn't there when they moved in or when they built their house.
Can I'm gonna make sure I understand. You're saying you and your company installed solar panels in November of 2020, you said? And that was approved by the city?
Yes. Yeah, we got all the required permits.
Okay.
Yeah, we had only heard through word of mouth that we were going to have to start doing variance requests in Dublin. And when we were looking in the code, we were a little confused. We couldn't find the exact wording. And in other jurisdictions, typically what happens is we present and discuss why we can't put them on the usually north-facing roof, and then they make we just haven't had issues really getting things approved when it's difficult to build on something that's not street-facing. So we were a little surprised.
And Zach, Tammy, based on the representation here, do you have a clear understanding of when the city began requiring the accessory structure code to apply to the solar panel installations?
The simple answer is we can't say a specific date. There wasn't a date and time where we made a written policy. We knew that there were inquiries that were coming in and we were looking for avenues to approve them. I just would feel uncomfortable saying a date and time. We'll obviously look into this site and ensure that there were permits issued. But at this point, I guess that's how I would address that question.
Yeah, we had one of our representatives attend one of the meetings last year, I believe in October, when it was discussed, and then we were told that they would no longer allow solar on the front of houses because we had previously, I think we've definitely done more than one. I found one specific example with photos and an address.
Do you know when you say they attended, I know it wasn't ours because we've never discussed solar, was it planning and zoning or city council?
It must have been a planning and zoning.
It was planning and zoning, and we would have administered the policy before that because that's what prompted that conversation.
So it appears we believe it's sometime after November 2020, but before November of 2021. Sound fair?
And again, I'm not, no disrespect, but I would want to verify that there were permits issued to the 2020, but yes, that's a fair assessment.
Assuming that what Jillian, I think is your name, is that correct?
Yep.
What Jillian said is accurate. We believe it's somewhere in that time frame.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you. I wanted to just verify that.
Let me just see. Yeah, I think you had pretty much addressed everything else in the first case. So if you guys had any other questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions for the public comment? No. Any additional questions for staff or the applicant at this time?
The only question was there any online comment for this one?
Oh, yeah. Good. Zach, any online comment?
We have not received any, no.
Okay. Any additional public comment for individuals that are present? Or we can begin our discussion. Robin, do you want to go first again?
Well, you know my thoughts on the second and third criteria. The first criteria, I do find the idea of the septic tank convincing that they can't plant the trees, which does cause the higher electricity bill. That is a special condition. They can't shade their house to make it more energy efficient or anything like that. So they can take advantage of the excess solar energy by putting it on there. And then if you pull up the house on Google Maps, what he said about the trees blocking the visibility is incredibly true. It is, the street view for that house is trees if you put your little man down there. So with the special condition or the intent and purpose of the requirement, I would argue that if it's to make sure that it's not like uglifying the neighborhood or something like that, then that's not going to happen with those trees there. So I would say I find the septic tank special conditions more convincing than the previous case, in addition to all the circumstances that I laid out for the previous case.
Thank you. Patrick?
I guess one point that maybe was sort of understated with regard to the third or the zoning code section that we're referring to here is so we discussed the fact that it is it seems to be really what's on point for that code section is property or improvements on like the borders of property. We talked about how it's behind all applicable setback lines. So it would have to and to the rear and side of the principal structure. Those are the last few words of the code section. I mean, I'm kind of inclined to say that again, and the solar panels would be an improvement on the actual structure itself. They would be more affixed to the exterior of the actual improvement, not necessarily something that's placed on the property. That might be a pedantic point, but I think that's something that should be sort of underscored with respect to how we approach this. Also, it's just the fact that we have this code section and there's it's just so inelegant that there's no one-to-one comparison here, that it's very difficult to really say that it's being substantially or materially impairing the intent and purpose of the requirement being varied, because I mean we're really sort of torturing the code section to come to the conclusions to begin with. So that's an additional comment to the third requirement. I guess the special condition that would exist here, as mentioned, would be the fact that there's so much vegetation in the backyard. It would be covering up the solar panels, rendering them almost ostensibly useless if it goes in the backyard. And there are the complications with the septic system, and the leach bed, putting the panels on possibly the side of the property. So I think that might be sufficient to create a special condition, although I would open it up to other thoughts as well on that matter.
Joe?
The comments about the side yard and the rear yard are not at all compelling to me, because the applicant himself is not asking us to rule in the side yard or the rear yard. So I don't know how that's anything in our consideration. I do think that some consideration should be given to the property, given the tree planting. But again, this is unique to this property. I can tell you from my time on this board, and I know that Jason was on at the time, we have had several homes that have wooded backyards that we've dealt with, and I believe the applicant said that this is this septic system situation is for other homes in the neighborhood. Again, unique to this property. When the applicant comes before us and says, this is what happens in our neighborhood, that to me eliminates the special condition. Again, wish we weren't in the same circumstance. So I'm probably at the same situation I was before, but I do have a comment that I want to make in addition to that. I believe, this is my opinion, that all of these should be tabled, and we should ask City Council to expedite this process and ask planning and zoning. And I know we have no authority to do that, and I'll just tell everybody that. But I would just like to hear from all the board members if you believe that these should be tabled and we should, at least ask. That's the best we can do. We can't direct anyone to do anything, but ask that this be something that's moved as expeditiously as possible, given the resources and timing that we have.
Mr. Nye, may I speak? Just your question about it not, by my admission, not being special or unique. The houses on North Center Road, that's probably, 6, 8 houses or something like that in Dublin. I think that still qualifies as special. Like, you're talking 6 houses out of the entire population of Dublin that are on septic, which is probably about the number. I tell you, I don't think we have to be the only one to be considered special.
So you're saying that there's only 6 houses in Dublin that have septic?
And certainly in our area, Dublin, I don't know the total population, but I'd be surprised if there were many.
Well, and so I'll just tell you, so based on what do you guys know the answer to that question?
I would definitely say that it's a small demographic, but I know in the Summit View area, there's homes on septic systems. So I would agree with you that it's not the common factor for properties, but I wouldn't say it would be limited to that many homes.
I would still think it's small enough to consider it special, just my take on it. So.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Would you guys mind? I mean, Rob, do you believe that we should have these tabled, or would you support asking City Council to expedite the
I
modifications?
absolutely support asking City Council to expedite. I don't want to take the decision out of the hands of the applicant. If we're recommending that they table, then I'm game for that. If we're saying we're going to table this, then that seems problematic.
I'm not moving to table. I'm asking if you would. I would recommend to table it, and I would recommend that we ask City Council and Planning and Zoning to expedite this. I'm just
So
asking.
you're recommending to the applicant that they table this temporarily while we tell the City Council they need to expedite.
We ask City Council to
Yes,
to
thank you.
expedite. Yes. Would you be in favor of that?
I would be.
I think the most persuasive voice that the city council could hear would be from you guys. Obviously, a lot of compelling arguments have been made tonight. This is not the most elegant, it's not a slam dunk. It's not easy to make this decision based on the language of the code. We need additional language, additional guidance. And I don't think there's any real compelling reason why this should continue in the manner that it has, that you should be precluded from installing these solar panels in the manner described here, outside of these legal parameters that we're bound to here. So I would say reach out to the city council, let them know your feelings on this. This should not be the last word on this matter because we don't really have the authority to, change the law. We just have to adhere to its structure.
And to clarify, the reason why I think we should table is because we've got a 2-2 split. And if we go to the vote, then the applicant won't be able to come forward with a similar application for another year unless the code is amended. So I'm in favor of tabling for the sake of the applicant.
I want to be clear. I don't know. Jason, have you said that you're a no? I don't want to presume that.
I haven't spoke yet. Again, similar to the reasons of the prior, it's south-facing is not a special condition. That in and of itself alone, based on how the code is set up and our obligations to follow the code as currently constituted, it can't satisfy that condition.
Can you address the septic system?
I don't care about the septic system. It's not relevant. And he does have an option we heard from, it's gonna be a more expensive option, but there is another option similar to the first case where there was another option that was very similar from a wattage perspective. I know that we're not talking about it here. Never didn't really come up that much, but there is an option now, or you can wait and table it, or you can call for a vote. It sounds like you got 2 no's and 2 yeses. You'll lose. You can then appeal to Franklin County. That is your right, if you'd like to do that. So I want to make sure, though, just so you're clear, Robin, you're a yes.
That's correct.
Patrick's a yes.
Yes.
So no or yes?
No.
Okay, so then again, we're at 2 and 2. We don't have our 5th member who may be here next month. Again, you may be able to convince him that you reach the special conditions. And for the reasons I said for the first case, we're tasked with, in theory, an impossible situation as a gap code enforcement. I think it's more appropriate to wait till the code is out, and I think you'll be able to hopefully have a reasonable stance and argument about what you want at that point in time based on what the city comes up with. Again, though, if this is an immediacy where you have to have these panels installed within the next, 5 to 6 months, which I don't know, then the only option may be to do them on the side of the house, which it sounds like would be expensive, but it's still an option. Do want to make sure here. Anything else to add about what we said?
No, and I do agree tabling with a fifth member. I mean, this is healthy conversation, and I think there's substantial merits that could be discussed. But again, the applicant should choose the path that's best appropriate for themselves.
Sure.
If that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do.
We're not telling you to do it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm shocked that we would, that like Dublin would allow a ground on, we're talking about the ground mount to the east of the house. Cause I mean, to me at least, it's obvious that the code is made up here and doesn't apply. The fact that 2 years ago we had houses installed with solar panels allowed in Dublin, permitted in Dublin. It's not one off. Maybe they didn't permit it. No, they definitely did. The Hawks Nest house permitted it. So we've made up the code, or we've tortured the code to apply here. But then we'd allow something else that's more expensive and arguably uglier to go up in place because, that fits the code. That's weird. So
it is. Look, I want you to understand, and I don't know how much I can express this, that we all agree with what you're saying.
Right. I realize you're saying the staff tells you it applies, you have to go that it applies. I get that.
Okay.
I disagree with staff's assertion, but that you can't, I guess. So that's fine.
And everything that you're saying is something, honestly, that can be expressed to planning and zoning and city council. And I think they're very compelling, not necessarily arguments, but reasonable basis for what's happening here. I'm sorry that you're in this position. I know it's unfortunate. I know you want to be able to use renewable energy, and I think we all do. And I think, the tax credit perspective, it's going to be extended. So that's not an immediacy.
Right.
That
definitely helps with immediacy because it was expiring this year, as there was an immediacy. Now that it's extended for 10 years or until the government changes it again, at least. So that does take that off again. In the grand scheme, it's not a big deal. We've had an electric bill for 20 years. We could continue doing that. It's not a change. It's just, we thought this was an easy thing. Oh, well, it made sense to us. We thought we'd apply it. I had no idea that we would run into these problems because again, they existed in Dublin from as recent as 2 years ago. So This was a surprise, but.
And as a related note, if you are in the state of Ohio, you can opt into your energy plan and you can choose 100% renewable as a.
Yes.
And I imagine a lot of the people in this discussion already do that, but that's.
Again, there's a cost to that where instead of your 14, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, it might be 16 or 17, but you can feel good about yourself then. I was doing this less for feeling good about myself, more because 7 cents a kilowatt hour sounded a lot better than 15 when I'm using 1,200 kilowatt hours a month. That's a significant savings to me. So that's why I was into it less than the ecological reasons are great too, but it was more just about saving money. So,
just to be clear, so I want to make sure. Would you like to? This is your decision again.
Yes, I would table them.
Okay. For the based on applicant's request for tabling, do we have a motion to table? This is formerly case 2, but now case 3, the Wadsworth residence at 6240 Post Road. That's case number 22-130V for non-use area variance with regard to street facing solar panels.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Mr. Nye,
Yes.
Mr. Clower,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wadsworth.
Thank you all for
Appreciate
your
it.
time tonight.
Thanks for your time. Staff, do we have any communications?
I do, yes. We had conducted a joint meeting between City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Architectural Review Board in August. And the board had presented several wishes of staff, one of which is in future cases that we present cases of similar scenarios so that we could provide some background and precedents for future cases. And we heard you, and we've done that in the past, and we intend to do that in the future. This particular meeting didn't warrant that kind of conversation because we simply didn't have precedent. But again, we look forward to presenting that information for you. We also just wanted to thank you for attending the meeting. It was well received, and I think it was a good conversation for all parties had. So thank you for putting that time and effort into the meeting.
Thanks, Tammy. I do want to add, based on the representations made by our board for these prior cases, that in some form or fashion, we would like to request planning and zoning and city council to expedite the proceedings relative to the solar panel code. So with regard to your ability to move forward with that request, we appreciate it through staff.
Can I ask, are we allowed to make a motion that we just at least send some kind of correspondence to them? And because I would so move
Jesse?
to ask that we
How does that
do
work?
that.
No, that power, I don't think that power falls within the prescribed powers under the code, but I think the message will
Yet again, something else we can't do.
And then Tammy, for our edification, when is the next planning and zoning meeting?
October 26th, is
No,
that?
it's on the city website.
Oh, wait, are you asking when the next Planning and Zoning Commission is, or BZA?
Planning and zoning, the one.
Sixth, yes,
Okay.
that's an easy
When
one.
you will be presenting this case, or potentially?
We actually have it slated for the second meeting in October, but again, this is preliminary conversations. And back to Jason and Joe's comments about relaying your wishes to City Council, we do give, for lack of a better term, evaluations of our meetings informally to council members, and we'll absolutely know that this conversation had taken place. But at this point, we're anticipating October to Planning and Zoning Commission. Typically speaking, I've done several code modifications. I would say 1 to 2 visits before the Planning and Zoning Commission is very typical, and this is a somewhat highly discussed conversation. So I just want to be realistic about the timeframes that are in front of us.
Yeah, I'm more asking so that if people wanted to go to that meeting as well, they would have the specific.
Absolutely. And, obviously they can keep abreast of our website, and I'm a contact for any of the future meetings. So I will contact and keep anyone informed of what our progress is.
Yeah, and I think on the Dublin's, where the city's website, it does mention the dates of the meetings, and the agenda is provided a few days beforehand. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
7
Good.
days.
7 days ahead? Okay, good.
No city council releases theirs 1 week ahead of time.
Do we have anything else from anybody? We good? Well, if there's no other further comments, questions, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.